Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
All right. Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Sam Stone with me here today. Sam is the managing partner of Cairn Consulting, a political consulting firm, and co-host of the Breaking Battlegrounds podcast. And he's wearing another hat even today. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Tim, thank you so much. A pleasure to be here.
So where is here physically for you?
So if the background looks a little chaotic and you see the orange vest in the background, that's because at the moment I am, among other duties, assisting newly minted Maricopa County Recorder Justin Heap with his transition into office and getting everything he wants to do up and going, which is something I've done for a handful of elected officials over the years. And that orange vest signals that I'm the floor warden in the event of an emergency. I got to round everyone up and get them out of here.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for doing all that.
Oh, yeah, it is a pleasure. And actually, this is kind of in a sense what I enjoy most about the work I do, because you come into an office like this, the recorder, a lot of people don't know. It ties to a lot of the work you've done in real estate, right? All the titles, deeds, documents like that are maintained by the recorder's office in each county. And then here in Arizona, our recorders are also responsible for a major role in elections. So I look at these as an opportunity to give back and do some things for the people of this state and this county that have done so much for me.
Awesome. Yes, that's great. Thank you again for that. How long does that sort of role take when you do those transitionary hand-holding?
It really depends on the office and what's going on. Some are very quick. Oftentimes, I'm really just there for a few days after they've been inaugurated.
Okay.
In this case, we're going on 4 months, and it may end up being quite a bit longer. Just because this is an office, I think a lot of people know Maricopa County has had controversy around elections, and this is an office that needed a pretty substantial course correction and management and oversight. So we're working on putting all that in place, and things are progressing very well.
Okay. Okay, good. Can you speak to any of the particular challenges with that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues we had when I came on board is you essentially on the election side have two major departments, early voting and voter registration. The recorder maintains the voter registration rolls and oversees all the early voting process, the ballot by mail. And those two departments essentially were not talking to each other. The communication between them was horrendous. There were personal conflicts involved. There were professional conflicts involved. There were structural issues. And so that's one of the things we identified right at the start here that needed to be fixed. And that change is coming along very, very well. They're working together in a way they have not in many, many years. And so
good.
I think that's going to be a great benefit to the voters in this county.
Okay. Excellent. So I guess you come in and just start over with first principles and figure out what jobs need to be happening here.
Yeah, you really got to start with very basic management principles and then go from there and make sure that the ground underfoot, it's a lot like building the foundation for a house, right? You have to make sure that the foundation is strong, or the whole house is going to come tumbling down. And for that, really, as much as anything else, is my role when I come into these situations, is just go down there and make sure that foundation is built to last.
Are a lot of the personalities or something in the exchange there elected, and so they move on, or are some of them permanent staff? Is it
No, the office has an elected head. Obviously, the recorder is an elected official, but everyone else is either an at-will employee, meaning the senior level people, or they are a professional government employee, so they are unionized and protected and all those sorts of things. But for the most part, the people I'm talking about there are the high level managers in each division and that sort of thing. So those folks are carryovers from the previous administration. And obviously, you always have to look and evaluate whether they're the right fit. We were very fortunate that we had very good people. The system just wasn't set up to
Okay.
effectuate their success.
Okay. Okay. So let's back up to the Cairn Consulting is and
Yeah.
how this current role fits with that. How did which came first and how did they play out?
Cairn Consulting came first a long time ago now, about 2008, 2009. I was in the advertising business in Tucson. And
Okay.
I'd come up in the advertising business, worked for a number of different firms around the country, and then had moved back to Tucson and set up my own little advertising shop.
Okay.
And I'll never forget the day. It was a Sunday morning. I was laying on the couch watching a University of Arizona basketball game. And a friend of mine called up and he said, "I'm running for city council." And I just started laughing and I hung up at him and dropped the phone on the floor. And he called me back and he said, "No, no, I'm serious. I'm running for city council. I want you to run my race." And I did. I had no clue what I was doing. I did it for him as a friend. The only thing I knew how to do was knock a door.
Okay.
And being a city council race in Tucson, it's a relatively small city. We just knocked every bloody door we could,
Wow.
and we ended up losing the race, but losing it by a few hundred votes against an opponent who was supposed to win by 30,
Okay.
by 30 points. So that kind of all of a sudden I had people coming up to me and saying, "Hey, come help me with my campaign."
Okay.
Um, Took off from
I'm
there.
curious. Okay. Okay. Very cool. Before you keep going, just have a little side question. Why did he want to be on the council? What was his platform?
Well, so he was basically a fiscal conservative, but it's kind of a funnier story than that. In Arizona, the state parties, these city races, are nonpartisan. And the state parties, Republicans and Democrats, cannot spend money in the race unless they have three candidates, a slate of three candidates to spend on. And
I've
he was
seen
the,
I've seen him in threes, so that explains
yes.
some stuff.
And so he was the third candidate. He was this sacrificial lamb to be able to generate funding for the other two who they thought would
Huh.
be more competitive. And as it turns out, one of those won, but the other one lost by a much greater margin than my friend Sean McCluskey did. So
Hmm.
um, he really outperformed expectations. And I decided at that point I liked the opportunity to do things that might be more impactful than selling a few extra pairs of sneakers this week.
Right. Right. Yeah. And how was going door to door and having all those conversations? Apparently you enjoyed that.
I did. Obviously, you go back to 2008, 2009. It's a little bit of a different time politically. It wasn't as charged as it is today.
Sure.
So you didn't have maybe the same, confrontations, but also city council races don't tend to have the same negative connotations that a lot of, the national politics and that does. So it was a great opportunity to go around and talk to all sorts of people. Got chased by a few dogs. Um, I walked into one house. You can, in Arizona at least, if you're knocking doors for political purpose and they have a front gate, if the gate is not locked, you can open it and walk up to their door.
Okay.
Um, Obviously, if it's locked, you can't. But so we, as a policy, you want to be able to talk to the person. So you open the gate and go in. So we're working in a neighborhood in South Tucson. I open the gate and walk in to go up to this house, and I look to my right, and there are two guys sitting at a table with AK-47s leaning up against it,
Yeah.
scales, baggies, and a mountain
Oh,
of drugs on
yikes.
this table. And I just freeze, right? I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? And they're looking at me, I'm looking at them. I hold out the handout and I say, "Hey, I'm just asking for your vote for my friend for city council." And I mean, I'm panicking. I'm about peeing my pants. And these guys look at me for a second, then they laugh, and one of them says, "Hey, I can't vote. I'm convicted. Give it to him." And so I gave it to his friend, and they said thanks, and I walked out. That was that. But
Oof.
you never know what you're walking into in those situations.
Right, right. Yeah, that's scary. Okay. Okay. So how did people started how did that progress? People started contacting you to help you with their campaigns.
So right after that campaign ended, because that a lot of our city elections are a little bit of an off cycle where they happen in August.
Right, right.
Um, there were a lot of candidates, obviously, at that time who were running for the November elections. And one of them, a young lady named Ruth McClung, reached out to me. She was running for U.S. Congress, and asked me to come do comms for her campaign. And so I did that. And then I ended up working for an organization called Freedom Works that did a lot of door-to-door, get out the vote type work. Um, and meeting a gentleman named Chuck Warren, who's become my business partner, who does a lot of turnout operations and ballot access operations around the country. And I've really kind of taken it from there, and obviously gone a totally different direction with my career since 2008. But you wake up and every day's different. You never know what the challenge in politics is. Every campaign's different. Every issue is different. And in the last few years, I've gotten much more into the policy side of it and writing legislation and building, campaign platforms in detail, and building platforms for office holders, which obviously is a whole different intellectual challenge, and I've just taken to loving it.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. So what's the best part of that? You said you love it, which is it the creative nature of it? It seems to fit with your marketing background.
It's the creative nature of it, but also the idea that you can do something creative that you can see a direct positive impact on people.
Sure.
I'll give you an example because it's been back in the news here a little bit recently. If you go back to about 2016, 2017, there was this huge issue with small group homes for recovering addicts and
Okay.
seniors and other things. This is a new category of treatment facility created under the Affordable Care Act. Only they were having huge problems with the neighborhoods. They were creating all sorts of controversy in the neighborhoods, conflicts with neighbors.
Not in my backyard type of
Yeah,
thing.
not
Okay.
partially that, but partially also, frankly, perhaps not an understanding that having a house that normally would have, say, 5 people living in it, now you've got 12 or 15 living in there.
Okay. Parking issues, all sorts of
Parking
things.
becomes an issue, and with people in recovery, obviously you have a lot of people who have relapses, and so then you get issues from that. So there were a lot of issues around that. We were actually able to start at the city of Phoenix, work through some policy there, get it up to the state, pass legislation that brought the Department of Health Services in to set some conditions for these group homes. It took away the conflict with the neighborhood. That's become a very successful model for people to transition
Okay.
through recovery,
Awesome.
and the neighbors don't have a problem with it anymore. It's really when you're able to see results like that. Um, there's nothing more satisfying. You really see that you can actually achieve things in
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
world.
Making an impact on people's lives and the community. So that's
Yeah.
great. That's great. So another little pivot here. How did the podcast come into play?
So back in 2019, 2020, start of 2020, Chuck Warren and I were talking about things we could do, essentially, as the pandemic was getting going, and we were kind of stuck in and not doing a lot of the
Right.
things we normally do. We started looking for things that would be both entertaining for us and informative, and allow us to explore different ideas with folks. And we decided to go ahead and work with one of the local radio stations and get a show set up. And then that very quickly turned into a podcast. And now 12 other stations in the network have added it onto their programming. So it's sort of slowly being syndicated. And I think we're both nerds in a certain sense. We don't like a lot of the sort of 30-second soundbite politics. And so this was an opportunity for us to bring in both elected officials, newsmakers,
Okay.
journalists, and people, business leaders from across the world, and have a more substantive
Okay.
conversation.
Nice. Yeah, long form,
Yeah.
proper discussion.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Not a debate.
No, we try to give our guests as much room as possible. We're not there to try to tell them they're wrong. We're there to try to really bring out what they have to say and
Right.
give that to our listeners and to present it in as clean and concise a package as we can. So our goal really is about letting them have the mic.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. That's kind of what I try and do in this show. I don't have the experience you do. How frequently does Breaking Battlegrounds?
So we air once a week. We
Okay.
record our show on Fridays. It airs on Saturday mornings, 9 a.m. on
Oh,
those
wow.
networks. And then obviously the podcast goes up as soon as the show has aired.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. And it's focused on Arizona?
No, actually, it's kind of focused nationally. A lot of our focus initially was national. We've been finding an interesting niche in covering international politics as they affect the
Huh.
United States. And so we've done a lot of coverage recently of Haiti because that's an area that nobody has been focusing on in the broader press, and it is in crisis in a way that it frankly it has never been before. We have a reporter that we brought on to our Breaking Battlegrounds team named Michael Dybert, who's actually down there right now for us reporting on it in person. And um, what he's saying is there are a lot of neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince that have traditionally been spared the violence, that the violence in the country was limited to a handful of areas. That has now spread into the entire country. The
Oof.
Dominican Republic is really on edge because of what's going on there and looking at a potential major crisis for refugees, a
Sure.
major health crisis brewing there. So while the world is turned elsewhere to Donald Trump and to China and to Ukraine and all these other things,
Right.
there are spots like Haiti and something I think not many people saw was that last week, and the tensions are still brewing. We came very close to a shooting war between China and India. Or sorry, India and Pakistan
Okay. Right. Right.
over their shared border regions, and so
Are there some water restrictions and other stuff?
yeah, so we're going to be focusing on that a lot actually in this upcoming segment this week and talking about that. But we've really kind of been trying to find news that maybe other people aren't paying enough attention to, or that
Okay.
maybe just needs a bit more platform.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting thank you for that. I think that's an interesting dynamic of the current algorithms, right? How things
Yeah.
just seem to keep getting bumped into feeds and therefore they decide they're more important, right?
It is one of the things I think that's a great insight. I think it's one of the things that's worst about algorithms is that it downplays things that may be very, very important but haven't gotten much notice. And
Right.
then if something else happens with a figure like a Donald Trump or a Kim Kardashian for that matter, that totally overwhelms everyone's feed with that
Right.
information. I think Americans probably know a lot more about Shador Sanders falling down the draft than they do about what's actually going on in whether it's Haiti or Ukraine or India
Right.
or almost any other part of the world this week. So,
Right. Right. Yes, it's a challenge, right? To navigate these new waters.
yeah. And it's one of the things actually I think we've found that we like the most about doing Breaking Battlegrounds is that it forces us to research a lot of things that maybe you wouldn't otherwise. I mean, I found myself spending hours last week going through the history of the India-Pakistan conflict, and there's so many things around the globe that are happening that we don't know much about, and I just
Right.
enjoy learning more about it as we go.
Sure. Sure. Now, how does that fit in with Karen and your consulting?
Well, so now that I've shifted Karen to being more of a policy platform consulting than get out the
Okay.
vote work, it actually works very well because this platform gives us an opportunity. First, I learn a lot that I can then take and use.
Sure.
A great example is we did some work a couple of years ago on what Israel had been doing in terms of desalination and pipelining of water. and they're 90% of their agricultural water now comes from desalination. They're piping it into Egypt and selling it to Egypt. They
Hmm.
have some issues there because they are draining a fairly small sea to do it, which is making that sea saltier and creating kind of an environmental concern there.
Right, right,
You wouldn't have that, for instance, though, if we were to build those type of systems on the Pacific or the Atlantic here in the United
right.
States or on a major ocean. So we've learned from that. I was able to take a lot of what I learned from doing that on the podcast and craft that into a platform for one of the gubernatorial candidates here in Arizona for desalination and water
Hmm.
for the West. So,
Okay.
that's a major issue we're going to be facing in the future. These things have kind of created a synergy where it helps me learn and develop better policy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You see a lot of people who are in media and host shows, and over the course of 5, 10 years or more, they become incredibly knowledgeable and with incredible insights into some of this stuff. So I think that's an absolute boon and great overlap.
It is, and I find the more I learn, the more I enjoy learning in every field. I grew up, I was a kid who hated math, and now I love it.
Haha.
And so I hope we can in podcasts like this and ours and others sort of pass that love of learning on to people, that it never stops, and frankly, the more you learn, the better it gets and the more fun it gets.
Right, right. So what do you think people in your industry find challenging that you excel at?
I think the biggest thing is taking complex ideas and being able to frame them in a way that the public will intuitively understand, right?
Right,
A lot of times when you're talking about, for instance, take an issue like homelessness, right? People generally want to be very compassionate for our homeless population, but the approach that has been used, which is based on a very compassionate premise, has not been very effective at getting
right,
homeless people off the streets. An approach which appears to be less compassionate, which pushes them much harder to get into treatment, actually has a much higher success rate and ends up being a far more compassionate approach in the long run because it
right,
actually helps people break the cycle.
right.
And so,
Unlike programs that like where San Francisco was giving alcohol to homeless people.
right. Well, I mean, they were giving everything right up to heroin to fentanyl to homeless people.
Yikes. Wow.
Um, and that's a program they've been rolled out in cities across the country called harm reduction that quite frankly increases the harm. It sounds real good,
Yeah.
um, but the reality is it's
You got to
not.
look long
So
term, right?
yeah, so how do you frame what appears to be a less compassionate approach so that the public will accept it and understand this is actually the right thing to do, not just
Okay.
for the broader public, but for individuals experiencing homelessness, is to actually push them. Sometimes you even have to arrest them
Right.
to get them into a position where they're going to accept treatment. That's a tough thing to sell to folks. I think my great skill has been in developing communication and developing these plans in a way that is palatable to people when
Okay.
sometimes you're talking about things that aren't easy.
Right, right. Sounds like the transition between marketing and sales. We're actually educating people along the way.
Very much. And in that sense, the sales and marketing background that I came from has helped tremendously. I think people in politics oftentimes get overly impressed by their own cleverness, and they're going to teach the world in 8 words at a time. Sometimes that just doesn't work.
Right, right. And it's very issue dependent. Yeah, there's all sorts of complicated issues here that
Yeah.
I'm thinking up. So, um, well, just another example is the West Coast in general. Washington this week just voted in to put in rent control, like Oregon and California, and like that's equally short-sighted, right?
It again,
It,
yeah.
it's not going to actually benefit anybody. The big rent hikes just happened, and there aren't any in the near future. But what it is going to do is going to limit supply and make the housing crisis even worse in the long term. So it
Yeah,
doesn't make sense.
It also becomes an insider game where people who know how to work the
Yes.
system end up with
Yep.
those units and everyone else suffers. There was a
Yep.
great study that was done about 8, 10 years ago that actually showed cities that have implemented large scale rent control
Hmm.
programs have increased rent at rates much, much higher than the national average. So it sounds great and it doesn't work.
Yes. Yes. There's a ton of case studies, and a lot of them are bigger cities, like you said, but it just, yeah, it doesn't play out. Um, but also in terms of being in a political, in an elected position, these complicated subjects, you have to be educated, and you're not supposed to be the smart one making the decisions for your constituents. You're supposed to be listening to your constituents and getting their feedback on things. But if it's such a complicated issue, they don't know that they're voting with their feelings, and not that it's how can you educate everybody and find that balance, I guess,
Well,
is the
so
question.
I think the key has always been the way I put it is the public tells us what they want us to do.
Right.
And it's our job to figure out how to do it the right way.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and so, we take the guidance from them, but then you've got to convince them that what you're proposing is actually the right way to approach a problem. And that oftentimes is tougher. It's one of the most difficult things, but the best thing about the United States as a whole and our political system is it's really designed to enforce compromise. But we've reached a place where neither side wants to particularly compromise.
Right.
And the same is true in the public and with activists. They're often in a position where they say it's our way or the highway, my way or the highway. The problem is that doesn't work very well in terms of governing, and you
Sure.
have to find some sort of middle ground that works for people sometimes. And so that's the other part of it is sometimes you have to temper passions a little bit and say, hey, there's boundaries, there's legal limits, there are practical limits, there are spending limits. We've got to figure out what the best possible thing we can do. How close can we get to what you're asking for
Right. And
in a
it's probably not going to be overnight, like a light switch, boom, and it's problem solved. These are big issues, right? That
yes, and then so that actually touches on another thing that I've been kind of focused on the last few years is that everything government does is taking far too long and costing far too much because it's tied itself in knots.
right.
The process in government just to get things done, whether it's to go out and get a contract, it'll take government, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years sometimes just to contract an entity to perform a particular service or function.
Wow.
Um, Whereas in the private sector, that's something that you would have had done.
In a
You'd be,
month or less.
yeah, I mean, you'd be upset if it extended past 30 days, right?
Right.
Um, and so a lot of it's well-intentioned stuff
Hmm.
that's supposed to create checks and balances, but what it has created is government gridlock at every level from your local municipality all the way up to the federal government. And actually it's one of the things I think is driving the rancor in politics in this country is that realistically we're being taxed more, we're spending more as a government, but not delivering in the way that government did 30, 40, 50 years ago here.
Right.
And so people see that, whether they understand what's going on, they feel a sense of urgency or betrayal. Some people saying, well, where are these services? We have to have them at any cost. And other people saying, well, if you can't do that effectively, then why are you trying to do it at all? At the end of the day, a lot of this conflict would go away if we could get to the point of making government work efficiently again.
Sure. Sure. And that's been a big topic in the news this year at a federal level.
It has, and I don't want to I don't want to blast the intent of Doge, but the way they've gone about it was what I would expect of technologists who didn't
Right.
understand government coming into it. And
Right.
I think they're running into some reality right now that they hadn't expected that they're dealing with. And this is one of the things that I have said to people for many years now is the the problem in government is going to take you really have to start at the local level and work your way up, not top down. You have to your local government has to become efficient and demand that its interactions with your state become efficient. Your state demands the same of the federal government, so forth and so on. Because I don't think the top-down approach they're trying is going to have the same effect just because people don't have the same access. You can corral your city council member or your board of supervisors member, or your state representative. The chance that you're ever going to have a real one-on-one substantive conversation with the head of the Department of Justice or a member of Congress or the U.S. Senate, very limited.
Okay. Okay. Interesting point. Okay. Um, Speaking of some of these challenges, what's been one of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome in your career?
Well, for me, it was mistakes that I made, quite frankly. I got into politics. I wasn't practiced in it, and I made a lot of mistakes out of the gate. One of those, very famously, people can look it up. We were in
Uh-oh.
a special. Oh yeah, yeah. No, I got blasted in the press from one side of this country to the other. Literally the Washington Post to the LA Times. Um, we were in a special election primary, and I passed some information to a opponent who was we my candidate was going to finish second in the special election primary. We were trying to get them in position where they would be the nominee for the general election in November. And I tried to play backroom, backdoor politics. It burned me. That was the best
Huh.
lesson I've ever had in my life. For two reasons. One, it was the kind of circumstance that kills most careers in politics, especially for people who were new. And
Okay.
I came very close to walking away and going into had a friend who offered an opportunity to come work with him at his mortgage brokerage. Um, and I came very close to taking that offer, and I just decided I like what I'm doing and I
Okay.
don't want to
Right.
quit and I'm going to keep going forward. And so it was a tough couple of years, but I bowled through it and then have become much more successful since.
Sure.
But the other lesson was brutal honesty. I don't play games anymore. I don't try to play politics. Um, Really, I try to take everything in this field head on. And if I have to tell you something that you're not going to like, I'm just going to spit it out right away and let's get past it.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Good lessons. Good for sure. Let's talk a little bit about goals. Your company's goals, maybe for
Yeah.
for 25 and the next maybe, I don't know, 5 years.
So my company's goals for the next 5 years actually are more policy based than anything else at this point. Uh, my number one objective, I have a platform of a handful of major reforms for the state that I would like to see. So I'm doing a lot of work trying to create the foundation for those to eventually get passed through the legislature, um, and hopefully signed by the governor. So that's really, my number one objective. But more broadly, Cairn's a little bit different because at this point, it really is about the policy I develop and work and that sort of thing. My major goal professionally is to get Breaking Battlegrounds nationwide. You know,
Oh,
that's
cool.
that's what we're really, I think both Chuck Warren and I are very focused on. It's been growing tremendously. There's a great audience. We're about to go to, I think, potentially a longer format and potentially start doing 2 shows a week. Um, but it's something that we would like to see grow and be syndicated nationwide, and I think it's well on its way towards that goal. And we'll know, we'll know when we know. But it's been such an enjoyable journey that we're both eager to see what heights we can
Okay.
take it to.
Excellent. Excellent. What are sort of the demographics needed for that next level syndication?
So for us, a lot of it now comes down to the total downloads that we're getting each month. When
Okay.
we cross the threshold for a 500,000 downloads, pretty much at that point, it's essentially certain the radio station would go ahead and syndicate us on all of their stations. And so that's really kind of our next step is to get to that point. We're about halfway there. We were at, 20,000, 30, 50,000, 100,000 subscribers for a couple of years. And in the last 18 months, we've really taken off to the point where we're approaching 300,000. And I think we're going to get to that 500,000 mark potentially as soon as this year within a 12-month period. So
Okay, excellent. Is that sort of time frame and that the kind of hockey stick growth, or just is it more based off of your efforts in marketing, or is it the algorithms and their nature?
it's a little bit of both. We have upped our own marketing efforts. We're putting a little bit more focus into it. We're increasing the amount of content we offer. I mean, originally it was just a 1 hour radio show.
Okay.
And then we added in an additional, 30, 40-minute podcast portion onto that. Then we started adding in some written pieces that both Chuck and I were doing.
Hmm.
And now we've added in a small stable of additional writers and podcasters who
Okay.
use our platform. And one of those, yeah, we're now in the point of bringing on a handful of additional podcasts. We're bringing in a sports podcast into what we're doing. We're bringing a podcast with a guy named Martin DeCaro called History as It Happens, um, which is a historian's perspective on modern events. And those have been both growing great. So we're really looking to build. Initially, it was Breaking Battlegrounds, and now technically behind the scenes, it's Battlegrounds Media, and we're really looking to expand into sort of a more cerebral corner of the news world and take that as far as we can.
Okay, excellent. That sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you. Uh, Reflecting on your journey, what do you wish you knew about building wealth and success earlier in your career?
I wish I understood more about investing. I wish I understood money when I was young.
Okay.
When I think like so many of us, you're young, and if you have any success out of the gate, money is to spend, not to save and to invest and to do things
Right.
with that will create long-term sustainable wealth. And I just regret that I spent the first 15 or so years of my adult career not having really that understanding or
Right.
knowledge. Because
Okay.
now I look back on it and I'm like, man, if I had done anything with those 15 years, where would I be now?
Right. Right. That's a common answer. Because people don't appreciate the nature of investing and time, right? It really
Right.
is time.
It is time and it's discipline. Um, that the older I've gotten, the more I've come to value small disciplines.
Yep.
Um, and big discipline also, but I think you can break that those larger disciplines down into little things you do each day as a matter of routine to build that foundation of success. So, for instance, I used to be a guy who got up in time to get to whatever I needed to do for that day. Now I'm a guy who gets up 3 hours before that so that I have time to do the things that I want to try to achieve before I have to do
Right.
the
A little more
routine.
intentional with your
Yeah.
time. Okay. And those things
Thing
compound for sure.
they do. And the more of those every year I just keep trying to layer more of those in. And
Excellent.
every time you layer another one of those in, it gets easier.
Okay. Great advice. Great answer. Thank you. Now, Sam, if people would like to learn more about the podcast, learn more about you, or connect, what should they do?
So the podcast's really easy. Go to breakingbattlegrounds.vote. Um,
Okay.
the reason it's .vote is obviously we do a lot of political work, but also that was one of my business partner's great investments is he secured the .vote domain name.
Huh. Okay.
And
Cool.
so that's become a great success. And so go to breakingbattlegrounds.vote. You can find us Breaking Battlegrounds on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any of those. And if you look up Sam Stone Phoenix, you can find all sorts of fun on me. But if you go, if you're an X user, it's at Sam the Paul, Pol, Sam the
Okay.
Politico, if you will.
Okay.
Um, and be aware that is a political feed. If
Okay.
if you want to follow me on Facebook, I'm an old school social media guy. I'm pretty much just X and Facebook. But if you want less political content, follow me on Facebook. We do all that over there.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening and watching. Thank you, Sam Stone, for joining me today. We appreciate you sharing your story and insights into the political landscape as well as having an impact here in Phoenix
Well, Tim, it's
and
a pleasure, and
and worldwide now.
yeah, absolutely, and it's a pleasure, and I love what you're doing here, and thank you for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.